you've been in the branded merch space for, I mean, you pre-2000, Catherine 2007. Maybe.
The medium that we sell is fun. We sell a product that creates an emotional bond between a brand and their customer. And that industry attracts people who are extroverted and creative and are generally very open-minded, and it creates a perfect environment for that.
We're super excited for where things can go still.
Welcome to the Sinclair podcast, where we share real-world experiences, wisdom, and the honest struggles of entrepreneurs to help you navigate and scale your business with confidence. Hey gang, I'm really excited to share this episode where I interview Mark and Catherine Graham, founders of commonsku. They're an incredible couple and business partners. They have brought an amazing piece of software to this industry. It's called commonsku. They share their stories of how they got into the industry, what they brought to the industry, and my favorite part, their dynamics as husband and wife, business partners, and all the fun things in between.
We are honored to be here.
Yeah, it was so exciting driving in from Toronto, and what a beautiful space you have here.
Yeah.
Thank you. As I mentioned, this is my first three-way. I'm really excited. This is, I'm looking forward to no comment needed.
Us too.
When I was first introduced to Mark, it was through a mutual industry friend. We were just opening up the doors of Brand Boulevard, I think going back to 2008. And when I reached out, Mark said, absolutely, I'd love to meet with you. At this time, their distributorship, doing what Brand Boulevard did, was something totally different, what we hadn't seen before. They were marketing, they were edgy, they were fun. They really focused on branding and the design experience. Product was the secondary. I reached out, Mark invited me up to the office, I got a tour behind the scenes, and I think it's a reflection not only of Mark and Catherine as people that are just open arms, but as our industry in general. It does a really good job of sharing best practices and making sure that high tides raise all ships.
That was a great visit. I remember it well, and you coming in and you had so much enthusiasm, and it was really great to share best practices with you. And I think I certainly recognized in you someone that was going to just take off like a rocket ship in the industry. And I think it's been really important for us to have these open and transparent relationships with other people in the industry. And our relationship over the last 15 plus years has really been a testament to that.
I think one thing that's so unique is that the pie in this industry is so big. And so it's not like this notion of, well, if you take this piece and I don't get that piece kind of thing. And so I think that ability to think expansively, and that we've always just had the philosophy that a rising tide floats all boats. And then if we all can be better in this industry, then the industry grows. And as opposed to thinking about it as a zero-sum game.
Mark's story is awesome. He goes from, selling newspapers, having this entrepreneurial spirit, gets a lot of this, by the sounds of it, from his grandparents growing up, goes into investment banking and realizes in 4 months it's not for him. Joins his buddy, selling t-shirts. His buddy goes and becomes a lawyer. But then Mark decides, this is my path, and I really see something special and unique here for the industry. 2000, he opens up Right Sleeve.
So I graduated in the late 90s from Queen's University, and I'd always been an entrepreneur my whole life. I'd been a lemonade stand kid. I shoveled people's driveways when I was a little kid. I had a window cleaning company throughout university. I ran the student newspaper. That wasn't entrepreneurial, but it was running the business operations of the Queen's Journal, and had always just grown up in an environment where I was my own boss, or I reported to very few people.
Where'd you get that from?
He had a lot of entrepreneurial influences in his family.
Yeah, I had an uncle who was a great success as an entrepreneur. May have got it in part from him. It's interesting. My parents were professionals.
Your grandparents.
Yeah, my grandparents as well. Yeah, that's right. And I think I also I caught the bug early on when I realized that I could make my own money. And that making my own money meant that I could be independent and not necessarily have to answer to anyone. And for me, there was something that was intoxicating about that formula. And so I had that as I said, a little kid. And I'd gone to school and I'd had these entrepreneurial ventures. And I graduate from school, and at this time in my life, I had this little weird voice in my head that said, it's time to get a real job. this
his own
weird,
head.
or this, that's a separate podcast. Some of the demons that go on in my head.
We could just have you on the couch line.
Yeah. Catherine, move over. It's time for me to lie on the couch. And you know, so anyways, that voice drove me into getting a job on Bay Street, and I got a job as an investment banking analyst at a company called First Marathon at the time, and I think they were subsequently sold to National Bank Financial. And through no fault of the firm that I was working for, I just couldn't stand the line of work. It was totally mismatched for my background, my personality, and I felt like for the first time in my life that I had genuinely failed. And this was, again, this voice in my head that was telling me, well, I had a certain vision for what success was going to look like, and I was no longer meeting that. And so after about 4 months, I looked in the mirror and I said, this isn't for me. And I had a friend who was selling T-shirts to mostly frats at McGill. He was a friend of mine from high school. And I'd
Literally a trunk slammer,
Yeah.
like out of the back of his car.
Yes.
Like,
and I called him up and I said, tell me a little bit about this, space you're in. And he had tried to recruit me to sell T-shirts for him while I was at Queen's as a student, and it didn't work at the time. And I remember him just telling me about the industry and about how creative it was, but there were many parts of the industry that just felt broken. And I thought that there was an opportunity for us to partner and to create something magical as a business that really thought about the industry in a different way. And 25 years later, here I am.
So what year did Brinksy build that?
It was in 1997 that I joined in partnership with this particular friend of mine. He went off to law school about 18 months later, and then I spun that share of the business into Right Sleeve in 2000.
Catherine's story is very similar to Mark's. She goes off to school, gets into investment banking, consulting. She's consulting for Fortune 100 companies. And just the thought of going over to this little promotional products distributor with 5 staff, almost in an element, it's an ego kick, but she finds out quickly that this industry is fun and her skill sets are so complementary and so different from Mark's, and she's got a lot of value to add.
I started in banking, went back and did an MBA, worked at eBay Canada for a stretch, kind of launching new categories. That was the first kind of dip in the water in technology and the internet and the changes that were happening, at that time. That was in the early 2000s, and then went into management consulting for several years after that. And I had always, obviously, when you are married to the person running the business, you are always living the business, but you're living kind of alongside the business, following the journey, kind of being able to kind of observe the highs and lows, but always kind of from the side. And I had been raised in a very traditional corporate kind of context with my parents and their careers, and no entrepreneurial influences whatsoever. Would never have considered kind of starting a business. That was just not something that would have ever occurred to me. And the time came around where after we had our first child, and I was taking a maternity leave from consulting and realizing that there was no way that I could go back to that lifestyle. They made it clear I was going to be on the road to the US 4 days a week. The hours were horrendous, and so that was just not, that was not what was going to work for me. So then I was trying to figure out, well, what do I want to do then? And I didn't really know. And at the time, kind of the business was going through, some changes and growth pains, and I ended up coming, it was a little longer after that I ended up kind of coming in, but it was always from the perspective of just coming for a little bit of time, kind of help, source, almost like from a consulting perspective.
Slowly reeling her in, yeah.
But, there was an element, I would say, almost of ego at the time, from the perspective that when I was working in consulting, you're working with big Fortune 100 companies solving big problems and working with the senior executives and working on strategy and big issues. And then at the time, Right Sleeve was 5 people. It's like, what are you talking about? You want me to come in as the boss's wife into this company and figure out what to do here? I don't know about that. And so it was very much I'll come in for a little bit. But then I think, as you know, this industry is so fun. And being in an environment where you have the ability to shape kind of every day what is happening within the business, and being able to, hire people and develop them and grow and kind of figure out all those pieces and the operational side of things and just the elements that were required to kind of get the business to the next scale. It was just suddenly way more fun than solving like the challenges of what's going on, over here in this big business. I think part of what worked surprisingly, because never in a million years would I have imagined that we would have worked together. And I think what ended up working really well is the fact that we both have very different skill sets and experiences that we're bringing to the table. And that enables us to work together in a way that is very complementary, as opposed to feeling as if, one of us was coming in kind of with opinions and stepping on each other's toes and butting heads. And it was just never like that from the beginning. And I think that was part of what just worked.
Mark came into this industry with a bit of a tech-savvy background. He identifies early on that this industry is clunky, from workflow to software or lack thereof. And like many entrepreneurs, he thinks naively to himself, why don't we just come up with our own?
So in this environment, balls are starting to drop. And what was becoming clear to me is that we could have stayed more or less at the same level of sales that we were at with the current systems, or we were going to just start falling down if we didn't implement something that was a better, more streamlined way of doing things. I had also come into the business with a tech-forward, tech-curious mindset. And I think what was really interesting about starting the business in the late 90s is that the web was starting to capture our collective imagination. And for me, as a young distributor in the promotional products industry that was going up against all these bigger players, technology, creativity, the web were all ways that I was able to differentiate in a world where there were giants that I was competing with. And that was fascinating for me, like the possibilities. It was a total blue ocean in terms of how technology was going to impact the business. So that was my mindset going into the business to start off with. So when I was looking at these problems that we were experiencing in terms of running the business, it wasn't a big leap for me to say, well, we could write our own system. We could create our own technology. And that's one of those ignorant things or naive things an entrepreneur will say, because of course when you say that, you're not really thinking how difficult it's going to be. Sure. It's just other than, hey, we could do this. We could do this. And I'll also say against the backdrop of that is that I had looked at a number of other platforms that were purpose-built for the industry at the time, and they were just not written to the modern standard that I was looking for. I was looking for something that was going to integrate every part of the workflow from the very beginning presentation all the way through to the final invoice and salesperson commission. And all the vendors looked at me and said, that doesn't exist.
Well,
or
this
if
was
you
also
want
in
it,
like the nascent days of the cloud, and everything that we were looking at was on-prem. And this notion of having to have a server that or should install kind of software on a CD that you were then running like on a server just seemed crazy in terms of where things were going. But I totally remember we had in the office space that we were in at the time, there was this hilarious little storage room where we had all of our accounting records, because it was so much paper. And I was this was before I was even really that involved in the business. I was doing something around accounting, and I had boxes on the floor, and we had our oldest son, I think, was 8 months or something at the time, and I had him on a blanket, like in this tiny room, sitting playing with some toys while I was going through some accounting records. And the person who was managing production was in the office, kind of right beside, and she had a stack of purchase orders, kind of on the edge of her desk, all of which had notes and sticky notes and handwritten things all over the place, all like in a specific order of kind of when things were shipping out. And something happened that the POs fell off the desk and went all over the floor. And all of a sudden I heard her like cry out in panic as I'm watching this paper like scatter, kind of the notes everywhere. And then thinking like, there is just got to be a better way to do this.
In the workflow, in the amount of paper, Catherine also realizes from accounting to POs to sticky notes, there's not a really strong software that they were looking to be able to implement. So like most entrepreneurs, what do? Say, we can do that. We'll come up with our own. Their journey of the foundation and starting commonsku was so awesome how it was inspired by some of the challenges that came out of the distributorship.
There were many, many problems, and we were trying to solve them, and writing our own piece of software seemed like the most reasonable option for us. And it started off with very basic requirements, like we need a presentation to convert to an invoice. And then, like Lego blocks, we just built this application that became very, very powerful for our own business to allow us to streamline the production experience, streamline the customer experience. We created a lightweight e-commerce product at the time. And this was like 20 years ago, so it was like the Stone Ages when it came to technology. But for a pure cloud-based application, it was incredibly unique, and it allowed us to work from multiple different locations without having to create VPNs, and it was just quite something. But there was never any intention on our part to commercialize it. It was just this internal piece of software that we were like, this is going to benefit Right Sleeve, and we're going to build this just to our own specifications, and we're just going to continue growing the business.
So knowing software is never done complete. At what point did you say, like, this is kind of where we want it for Right Sleeve?
Never. But that is the inherent challenge of when you have a developer in-house, is that there's always like, this can be improved, that can be added, this can change. And you don't have those same bounds around you as if you are perceiving it as an outside vendor that you're paying. And I think that's one of the challenges of the fact of when you're constantly kind of tweaking in order to be able to make it work for this next new thing that you want to do, and that reached the point where it becomes a give and take within your focus within the business, and that's, of course, that was almost more fun in terms of like you're figuring this thing out, and this is new and interesting and intellectually challenging, and that became kind of, I think, where the first seeds got planted of like, this is kind of an interesting world over here. And we were doing a lot of business in the tech space at the time, and so spending a lot of time kind of with software companies and founders and being more immersed in what was going on within that world, and thinking like, that's pretty interesting over there. And so we ironically took the entire original application and of the old code base that was never meant to be a multi-tenant system, and we copied it over, like we made a replica essentially kind of that code base. And Dave McLaughlin, I don't know if you know of McLaughlin Promotion.
Yes, absolutely.
That because we had known him for a long time, and we've been talking about the software, and he was like super curious to kind of to try it out. It's like, well, we could have you try this out and see whether this this works for our business, but would it work for someone else's business? And so that was basically kind of a test case of from a conceptual perspective, that would all these workflows that we have built in as being kind of assumptive to how the business should operate, would that work in a different context? And they loved it. And it was this totally kludgy, like hacky copy of things, but it was proof of concept, right? And so at that point, we're like, all right, mate, let's do this. And so we then spun it out completely as its own separate business. We re-architected the entire platform from scratch, rebuilt the whole thing, and at that point, kind of then moved into a completely different era at that stage. The first kind of true customer that we brought on, like after McLaughlin, was Brand Fuel, and in a very much a beta situation, we had moved Right Sleeve over kind of from the old platform. We put Brand Fuel on as a beta customer, and went through a very painful kind of 6 months of trying to figure out kind of how to get this platform basically replicating all the old features that we had already built that we thought would be so easy to be able to to recreate within a new code base, that we had all the business logic and everything kind of there, and of course like complete naivete around how long these things take and that painful part of the process. And we give a lot of credit to Danny Rosen and Robert Fiveash for their patience of kind of going through that journey with us during that time, and reached a point where we felt that the business the software was finally at a stage where it was more kind of ready for prime time. And at that point we started bringing on additional beta customers, and then finally kind of spun it out. But could we possibly have imagined that we'd be at the stage now? Like, it just was not. You're taking it one day at a time when you're building a business, right? Like, you weren't thinking kind of that far ahead at that stage. It's survival mode.
I think it also speaks to the power of compounding, that each and every day in the business, I think we've felt that we have moved the needle ever so slightly forward. But when you look back at it after 10, 12 years, it cumulatively is quite something. But I don't think in the moment you're really conscious of that.
One of my favorite qualities about Mark and Catherine is they're just so humble. In this piece, they talk about the difficulties and challenges of financing the build of a software to solve a problem from one business, but realizing how many challenges that it's facing. It costs way more time and way more money than most people think when they're building a software.
We had to be conscious of the impact on our employees at Right Sleeve and how it is that they felt about the two founders of the business diverting their attention to something else. And there may have also been some thought like, hang on a second, they're commercializing a product that's making Right Sleeve successful to our competitors. Like, what's going on here? So there, in those very, very early days, there was a dynamic that we had to really navigate between these two businesses, one that was much more established and one that was, not established at all. And navigating those two things was I would say, pretty tricky in those days.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this was the one thing that was fortunate about the fact that Right Sleeve was doing a lot of business within the tech space at the time, is that we had, access to a lot of people within that network, and we set up coffees and asked the stupidest questions of all time in terms as we were trying to figure out
We still ask
how to build a
questions,
software
by the way.
business. But it was that willingness to be vulnerable, and that we've never done this before. Like so we want to ask you like all the things that you've learned along the way, and how to structure teams and how to think about things like a software business is so different than a promotional products business, and so that learning curve was massive in the early days, and just being willing to kind of put ourselves out there and not feel as if we had to pretend to know all the answers. And there's very much in the tech space at the time, there was very much kind of a bravado of needing to have this, we've got it figured out, we're crushing it. Like that was like so kind of the mentality at the time of people within the context of either looking to raise venture capital or whatever else, like that, that you had to feel as if you'd figured it all out. And so there was that willingness to kind of say that we didn't know all the answers was very counter to the culture at the time, and I think that created sometimes kind of a dissonance almost in terms of who we felt we should be showing up like on that side, but who we actually were from an authentic self perspective. Just like that willingness to say we want help, we want to connect, we've both of us have always very naturally been very community oriented, and just the notion that being able to talk to others and share experiences, just as we said earlier, the rising tide floats all boats, and we felt that same way within the technology context, that there's so much for us to learn, and people that were willing to be able to share those experiences helped us enormously in terms of figuring out those things that we just didn't know.
Let's talk numbers. They share the sheer massive numbers, 900 distributors, $2 billion in revenue. And one of my favorite parts is they talk about the challenges and the time it took to bring on the right investment partner, why that partner, and how that partner is going to help scale their business even larger in the upcoming years. Let's jump back in.
Yeah, so we're about 900 distributors in the platform now. We're doing just shy of 2 billion in volume. Yeah, it's I think what's interesting is though, although that those numbers sound kind of large within the context of the industry as a whole, and there's a lot of ways that the industry is defined. Some numbers more classically in terms of within specifically the promotional products world, but you think about the evolution of what branded merchandise has become over the past number of years, and how expansive that industry actually is from a numbers perspective, that we very much feel as if we're just at the we're just getting started. We've only got a tiny little portion, and we're super excited for where things can go still. I think what's always very interesting within that journey is that when you're in the position where you don't need to partner with anybody, that is when the best opportunities come along. And I think what's that expression that businesses should be bought rather than, or sold rather than bought rather than sold. That how it is that you think about kind of creating a business where it puts you in a situation where you have the freedom of choice. And yeah, I mean, the amount of inbound interest that we have received over the years and that we continue to get it can be very overwhelming at times. But being able to kind of sift through that noise, like Frontier just absolutely stood out from the beginning around what research they had done kind of far beyond just the typical AI-inspired research, and the far more personal kind of way in which they looked to connect. And I think the challenge, like there's a lot of different personalities and approaches and values kind of within the private equity space, and a lot of it doesn't align with kind of how it is that we think, about our business and culture and people and all those things. And Frontier was very much in alignment with how it is that we think. And they bring a very humble and a very kind of helping, approach. They always use the phrase that we are invited guests at the table, and how it is that they can kind of work to be supportive as opposed to feeling as if they're coming in and telling us, what to do. And that it has been the experience kind of working with them has been every bit kind of what was, positioned to us from the beginning in terms of what their relationships are like, kind of with the portfolio companies they work with. And we just feel incredibly fortunate to have found, a great partner. We did not need the capital. We were in a situation where we did not need to bring on investors. And I think the piece that we were looking for was more, how do we get some smart people around the table that can help us figure out how to take this business to the next stage? Because we felt that the opportunity was enormous. We felt as if we were still in that learning journey ourselves around figuring out, how to take things to the next level. And we at that point, once we decided to kind of engage in conversations, we had a number of meetings. And part of what was extremely appealing about Frontier is the fact that they invest only in vertical B2B SaaS businesses. And so they have seen this movie and many other industries, and therefore kind of can bring a degree of perspective and expertise and also connectivity into the other portfolio companies that can enable us to just get a lot smarter, a lot faster.
Being our own bosses, to some extent, you're not accountable to anyone. Of course, you're accountable to stakeholders like your customers and your banking partners and your employees and all that. But at the end of the day, if you miss a quarter, it doesn't really matter. It's your business. And as long as you can pay your staff, then, you'll try better next quarter or whatever. And I think for us, we were looking for that right blend of still the majority control and being the entrepreneur principal owners, but at the same time having some of that outside accountability, frameworks. I wouldn't call pressure, but just more like, here are some ways that commonsku can rise to its true potential. And I think for us, we always knew that we were building something really special that had the ability to make a profound impact, a very profound and positive impact on our industry. And we felt that we were just getting started and had made great progress. But if we could align ourselves with people that had really differentiated themselves as being experts in vertical business-to-business software, and we could tap into that knowledge base and the portfolio of other customers other software companies that they worked with, that was exactly what we were looking for at this next stage of our career. So that outside best practices and accountability was something that we certainly signed up for and we've certainly received, and it's been very, very impactful.
Yeah, and we'd be remiss to say that, in the journey along the way, kind of before that point, we had an incredible angel investor who came on board a few years into the business and was absolutely transformational. We were very, very fortunate to have had that kind of all along the journey, and then that opportunity to be able to bring in someone else when we had that high bar in terms of that he was the bar that we were holding anyone to in terms of who we were willing to bring around the table kind of after that point in time. And we're very fortunate that he continued through kind of after Frontier came on board, so he is still with us.
Being married to your co-founder does have its challenges. I love their perspective on sharing, not just all the greats that come with that, but some of the challenges. And they talked about this 15-20% of the times where there's conflict. How do they handle it? How do they know when to just park some of those work conversations when they're at home? When they talk about their hiking and the infamous times they go out when their employees and team know that they've gone on a hike, they generally know they're coming back with a huge list of to-do items. Let's get back into it.
Yeah, we're going to dig a little further into not butting heads.
Butting heads all the time.
No, it's more for her.
Butting heads sometimes is a good thing. You need that.
Absolutely. It's necessary.
Yes.
It's necessary. Catherine and I have very different skill sets and personalities, and I think that that's one of the primary reasons why it works so well, in that Catherine is so smart at so many things and is the best in the world at so many of these things. And I'm so fortunate to be able to work with her or you in these particular areas. And so that complementary relationship is something that's a real gift. I think that I've always been someone who has had lots of great ideas. I think I'm a pretty good executor and implementer as well. But to be able to share those ideas and then have Catherine build upon them, and for us to then come together and not only come together with these amazing ideas, but then also to put together a great plan. There is no one better than Catherine Graham at being able to do that with. So that's the good. We can talk about some of the bad.
So he's trying to butter me up before he's puts in some of the.
But no, there's no buts. Like at the end of the day, when I think about the best relationships that I have, and I certainly have many of them within my own within commonsku, is that I love being partners with people who are able to build upon a creative idea, challenge it, and then put together an amazing execution plan. So it's not just some flaky idea, like, wouldn't it be great if we did this? It's like a great idea married with incredible execution, and then we get after it. And Catherine personifies that, but there's certainly other people that I have similar relationships with, and it's very, very special. I think one of the most exciting things about being an entrepreneur is that you get thrown so many interesting problems to think about and to solve. And I think that that's what we love the most about the business, is being able to look at these problems and think about creative ways that we can solve some of the issues that come up. And they follow us home, absolutely. They follow us around on the weekend. They follow us around on these hikes that we're talking about. A lot of our staff will make fun of us that whenever they know we've gone on a hike, that's like, watch out,
Boxes are going to get
watch out, it's some other problem.
But I think in some ways that's part of why it works, though, because you think about that there is such a significant part of both of our brains that are preoccupied by this, and it is hard to turn that off. And so when you have that ability to, when it's on both of your minds, and you're out, walking on the weekend, to say it's okay to talk about it because we're both thinking about this right now. As opposed to if your spouse is in a totally different kind of line of work, and it's like, I'm sick and tired of hearing about that. Like it's I can appreciate that there's that challenge too. Yeah.
And I don't know if you'll agree with this percentage, but I would say 80% of the time, those conversations are the most exciting, creative, strategic conversations of all time. Because we're both attacking a problem from different perspectives and then coming and solving the problem. I would say 15, 20% of the time, on average, neither of us know the answer. And we are both so like we are problem solvers by nature. We were born to solve problems. I feel, and if it's a problem where we don't both know the answer, and we're spinning our wheels, we'll spin them, and that's where it can get frustrating, and we create the tension, and that's where I think Catherine's talking about, like, I just need the space.
Let's not talk about this.
And either I'm like, well, no, I'm getting started here, right? Or vice versa. Yeah, now hang on, it's not always me. Sometimes it's Catherine as well, where I'll tune out and say, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Mostly me, but I think that's coming from a really good place. It's coming from a place of wanting to solve something and not ever giving up from that tenacious, like, we're going to run through a wall until we solve this.
Some of it's also him trying to sell me on what it is that he thinks is the solution.
Well,
and it's
I am an entrepreneur.
I will beat you down. I will beat you down until you have to say yes, because you are so sick and tired of talking about this.
This is the entrepreneur and the old corporate banker, right?
I give up.
Yeah, no, I know. And talk to my mom about that. I mean, I just don't stop.
My favorite quote from this part was disagree and commit. Catherine and Mark talk about their healthy tension, the disagreements, getting into some of those really challenging moments of at what point does someone back down? I think there's so much great takeaways in relationships and within business here, and how they've empowered their entire team underneath them to have healthy tension and move forward.
Catherine, you've always used the term disagree and commit, which is something that I reluctantly accept.
Do tell.
But
Disagree and commit, but still try and sell her on the...
Yeah, that's true. But I think ultimately you are right in that I think the sign of a healthy partnership or a healthy relationship with your team or with someone else is that you could talk about an issue Multiple people might have different perspectives, but at the end of the day, someone needs to make a call and we need to commit to it. And that doesn't mean everyone's going to be happy about that, but at the end of the day, if you don't commit, then you're not going to go anywhere. And sometimes I'm right, and sometimes Catherine's right. Mostly she's right, but
it's something that we also are working on as a leadership team. And
Yeah.
I think that there's an element of being very Canadian at times, of wanting to be nice and wanting everyone to get along, and having kind of a discomfort with conflict. And the only way you're going to get better as a business is being able to kind of have open conversations. You want different perspectives around the table. You want to disagree sometimes, and so
that's tough.
if creating an environment where that is okay, I think is something that we've kind of had to work on as a leadership team, that or not not having the assumption that we are always the ones making the decisions or making the call, or that they can't disagree kind of with us. And so as we've grown as a leadership team and who it is that we've brought in, that being able to have those different opinions around the table and being able to celebrate the fact that we don't agree on things, I think is a very good thing.
Towards the end, they talk about the lessons learned in this industry and how much it's given them. Things like not taking yourself so serious, the power of a community, and how playing the long game is so important in any business.
The things that seem really kind of existential or hard now will be meaningless 5 years from now. We always use the expression of when there's a moment in time where things feel so stressful or so terrible, and it's what would your 5 years from now self say to you right now? And it's what you're dealing with right now is nothing. You'll be okay. Carry on. And so I think just those stages of building a business are really hard, and just recognizing that every day is a new day, and you gotta get up and you gotta push through whatever new thing kind of that you haven't been through in that day. But the power of community is a big element of kind of what can get you through those challenging times. There are a lot of people in this industry in particular who are willing to help and to share, and to that ability to kind of tap into those that have been there ahead of you and made those mistakes that you can learn from, that I think that makes the journey an awful lot less lonely.
Don't take it so seriously. Probably need to give myself that advice today too, but
It was such a pleasure having Mark and Catherine on. Their story is a testament to hard work, innovation, and the power of building a community. They brought so much to the branded merchandise industry, and it's been amazing to watch their story. I'm excited to follow along with their new partnerships and how much they continue to impact not just this industry, but a lot of other people along the way.